On February 17th, 1823, at precisely 11:42 at night, Father Tomás Aguirre awoke screaming in his cell beside the colonial church of San Francisco Xavier in Querétaro. For the third time in just 1 week, he had heard the same death described in the confessional, down to the smallest, chilling detail, by different people. And 48 hours later, that death came to pass exactly as it had been foretold. Dr. Montero was found with a silver dagger lodged in his chest, 13 drops of blood forming a precise pattern across forged medical documents. From that moment, the townspeople began avoiding the dark wooden confessional, carved long ago by the last 3 Otomi priests. They whispered that those who dared to enter would emerge drenched in cold sweat, with the haunting sensation of having revealed secrets they did not even know they carried. What happened in the weeks that followed remained hidden, sealed under orders from Bishop Valencia himself, until June 4, 1917, when a 6.7 magnitude earthquake split open a sealed crypt beneath the main altar. 5 workers who glimpsed its contents died under inexplicable circumstances within the next 23 days. Today, we hold access to the documents that no one has seen since then, and what they reveal about Father Tomás, and that confessional defies every rational explanation. Querétaro in 1823 was a divided city. Only 2 years had passed since Mexico's independence, and tensions between the conservatives, faithful to Spanish tradition, and the liberals, eager to build a new nation, could be felt in every corner. The majestic church of San Francisco Xavier rose like a monument to unshakable faith, surviving even the storm of revolution. Its golden quarry walls shimmered under the sun of the Mexican highlands, while its twin towers stretched long shadows across the cobblestone streets at dusk. The temple had been built in the mid-16th century, when the last indigenous groups of the region were finally converted to Christianity. According to the elders, the very artisans who once carved idols for their ancient gods had been forced to chisel the ornaments of the church. Among these works, the main confessional stood out, an imposing structure of dark wood, its intricate reliefs blending Catholic symbols with subtle native patterns almost invisible to the untrained eye. It was into this world that Father Tomás Aguirre arrived at the age of 58. A tall, slender man with an angular face and sunken eyes, as though he bore the weight of every secret he had ever heard in decades of priestly service. Born in Seville, Spain, Aguirre had come to New Spain as a young priest of 23, burning with evangelical fervor. Unlike many Spaniards who returned home after independence, he remained. His impartiality during the conflicts had earned him respect from both sides. He had attended to dying royalists and wounded insurgents alike, gaining the reputation of a just man in unjust times. Dona Catalina Mendoza, the elderly woman who had sold candles in the church atrium for more than 40 years, often told anyone willing to listen that Father Tomás was a saint with his feet firmly on the ground. She described him as a man of iron discipline who followed the same strict routine every single day. Rising with the first light of dawn, morning prayers, a modest breakfast, hours in the confessional, visits to the sick, a late lunch, sacred study in the afternoon, evening mass, and then long hours writing in his personal diary deep into the night. That diary was his only personal indulgence, a thick, leather-bound tome he guarded with jealousy. In it, he recorded his observations of the community, his theological reflections, and, it was rumored, the strange dreams that occasionally haunted him. No one had ever laid eyes on those pages during his lifetime. Meanwhile, daily life in Querétaro followed a predictable rhythm, marked by church bells and religious festivals. On Sundays, the main square filled with families in their finest clothes, merchants selling sweets, and musicians playing traditional sones. It was a small, orderly world. No one could have imagined the horrors that were about to unfold. nor how the respected Father Tomás would soon be dragged into a spiral of events that blurred the line between faith, madness, and something far darker. The young Father Sebastián Morales had recently arrived from Mexico City to assist the aging Tomás. At 32, Sebastián represented a new generation of priests, educated in an independent Mexico, with more modern ideas and a less rigid vision of faith. Their relationship was respectful, though distant. The young man admired his mentor's dedication, but found his methods too severe for changing times. Meanwhile, in the community, certain figures stood out for their influence. Don Emilio Ordóñez, a prosperous 45-year-old merchant who had amassed a fortune during the Wars of Independence by supplying both Spaniards and insurgents, now controlled much of Querétaro's commerce. Then there was Dona Mercedes Valverde, a beautiful 28-year-old widow. Her husband, Don Emilio's brother, had died under circumstances never fully clarified. She lived under her brother-in-law's protection in a grand mansion near the main square. And there was Dr. Alejandro Montero, a 40-year-old physician trained in Paris, who had brought modern ideas that often clashed with religious traditions, creating friction with the local clergy. None of them, nor the rest of Querétaro's citizens, suspected that soon they would all become players in a story so dark that, for nearly 2 centuries, the Church would attempt to bury it deep within the Vatican archives. It all began one Tuesday in February 1823. That morning, cold air slipped through the cracks of the confessional as Father Tomás settled into his seat, preparing for another day of hearing the sins of his flock. The first confessions were the usual routine: small lies, impure thoughts, petty jealousies, and daily resentments. But near midday, the routine broke. The creak of the curtain announced a new penitent. Through the carved lattice, Father Tomás recognized Dona Mercedes Valverde, her black veil framing a face that had not lost its beauty despite years of mourning. "Ave Maria Purissima," she whispered with a trembling voice. "Sin pecado concebida." The priest answered automatically, though he immediately sensed something unusual in her tone. What followed chilled Father Tomás to the bone. With a voice that was methodical and curiously devoid of emotion, Dona Mercedes confessed that she had been contemplating poisoning her brother-in-law, Don Emilio. "Father, I have had terrible thoughts," she said. "Each morning I see the arsenic on the kitchen shelf. I imagine it dissolved in the hot chocolate that Don Emilio drinks every night. I can see his face contorting as his body convulses beneath the great silver chandelier. I see him clutching at his throat as his eyes turn glassy, while the dark liquid dribbles from the corners of his lips. And worst of all, Father, in these visions I do nothing to help him. I only watch, feeling as though justice is finally being done for my husband's death." Father Tomás shuddered at the clinical precision of her description. It was not uncommon for people to confess violent thoughts, but the clarity and detail disturbed him deeply. After giving her spiritual counsel and a penance, he dismissed her with a blessing, watching as her slender figure drifted away into the shadows of the church columns. 3 days later, Don Emilio himself entered the same confessional. The priest immediately caught the scent of brandy on the merchant's breath, evidence that he had been drinking despite the early hour. "Father, I don't know if I'm going mad," Don Emilio began after the usual formalities, "but I've been having thoughts, visions, I should say, about my sister-in-law." Father Tomás's heart quickened, remembering Mercedes's confession. "Go on, my son," he said, his voice calm though his chest tightened. "I see her in the kitchen, taking arsenic from the shelf. I see her pouring it into my nightly chocolate. I can taste the metallic flavor as I drink, unaware of what's inside. I see myself convulsing at my own table beneath the silver chandelier, clutching my throat as dark liquid trickles from my mouth. And she only watches, Father. Watches with satisfaction on her face." The priest felt the air leave his lungs. The words were practically identical to those spoken by Dona Mercedes. as if both had memorized passages from the same macabre book. "Have you had any disputes with your sister-in-law recently?" he asked, grasping for a rational explanation. "No more than usual. She believes I had something to do with my brother's death, which is absurd. Fernando died of fever. Dr. Montero certified it." That night, unable to sleep, Father Tomás broke one of his strictest rules. He took out his diary and recorded both confessions, disguising the names, but leaving the disturbing details intact. As his pen scratched the paper, a drop of hot candle wax fell onto the page, spreading like fresh blood across the parchment. One exact week after Mercedes's confession, the church bells tolled to announce a death. Don Emilio Ordóñez had collapsed at his dinner table, convulsing violently as dark liquid poured from his lips. He died beneath the silver chandelier, exactly as both penitents had described. Dr. Montero, summoned to examine the body, officially declared that Don Emilio had suffered a sudden apoplexy. But Father Tomás had noticed the flicker of doubt in the physician's eyes. At the funeral, the priest watched Dona Mercedes, her face perfectly composed behind her black veil, showing neither remorse nor triumph, only a strange, unnerving serenity. That same afternoon, while Don Emilio's body was being lowered into the earth, two young men slipped quietly into the nearly empty church. Father Tomás recognized them immediately: Antonio Suarez and Miguel Dominguez, childhood friends who had lately seemed to drift apart. Antonio was the first to kneel in the confessional. His voice shook as he revealed a terrible plan. He was considering challenging Miguel to a duel for the affection of Carmela Fuentes, the mayor's daughter. "I see it clearly, Father," Antonio whispered. "At dawn, by the old oak tree on the road to San Juan del Rio. The seconds measure out 20 paces. When we turn, the rising sun glints off the barrel of his pistol. I fire first, but I miss. His bullet strikes me just above the heart. I fall to my knees, feeling warm blood soaking my white shirt as the dust of the road rises around me. The last thing I see is his face, horrified at what he has done." A chill ran down the priest's spine. The description was unervingly precise, and far too reminiscent of the confessions he had already heard. 2 days later, Miguel himself knelt in the same confessional. His words were an exact echo of Antonio's, describing the same duel, the same failed shot, the same fatal wound, and his own horrified face as he watched his friend die. This time, Father Tomás resolved to act. Breaking the sacred seal of confession, a rule he had sworn never to violate, he sought Antonio out after Sunday, Massachusetts. He persuaded the young man to accompany him on a pastoral visit to a sick family in a nearby village, ensuring Antonio would be far from Querétaro at the hour of the duel. But fate, or something darker, had other plans. On their return journey, Antonio's horse inexplicably panicked as they passed the very old oak tree he had described. The young man fell, and in the chaos his own pistol discharged. The bullet struck him just above the heart. When Father Tomás reached him, Antonio was already on his knees, blood soaking his white shirt, dust swirling in the air around him, exactly as he had described in confession. And there, only a few yards away, stood Miguel Dominguez. By sheer chance, he had been walking along the road. His face bore the same horrified expression Antonio had foretold. That night, with trembling hands, Father Tomás added the incident to his diary. He wrote feverishly, desperately searching for a pattern, for an explanation that would not shatter everything he believed about the world. Was he witnessing genuine premonitions? Or were his own interventions, in some dreadful way, ensuring that the visions came true? The following weeks brought even more confessions, each one a prophecy, each one followed by its macabre fulfillment. A fire at the bakery on the main street, described in detail days beforehand by both the baker and his rival. The deadly fall of a mason from the bell tower, confessed both by the foreman and by the mason himself. The discovery of a corpse in an abandoned well. foretold by both the victim and his killer before the crime was even committed. With every new coincidence, Father Tomás felt his sanity crumble a little more. His diary filled with frantic notes, wild theories, desperate prayers. The few parishioners who still approached him noticed his decline. He had grown gaunt, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, and his sermons had begun to drift into apocalyptic themes. And worst of all, the people of Querétaro had started to avoid confessing to him altogether. Rumors spread like poisonous fog. Some said Father Tomás could read minds. Others claimed he asked questions that revealed secrets no one had spoken aloud. The most superstitious whispered that his eyes could now see the future, specifically, the manner of each person's death. The young Father Sebastián watched with growing dread as his mentor transformed into a shadow of the man he had once been. One morning, mustering all his courage, Sebastián confronted him in the sacristy after a particularly disjointed mass. "Father Tomás," he said, "is something troubling you? The congregation is worried." "I am worried." The older priest lifted his bloodshot eyes, staring past him into some invisible distance. "The confessional, Sebastián," he murmured. "There is something in that confessional." "What do you mean?" asked Sebastián, fearing that his mentor had finally succumbed to madness. "It whispers of things before they happen. It shows me deaths, tragedies, sins not yet committed." His voice broke slightly. "At first, I thought it was God testing me, giving me the chance to intervene, to save souls and lives. But every time I try to change what I've seen, it happens exactly as foretold." The confessional itself sat silent in the dimness of the church, its dark wood carvings seeming almost to watch them, as though it were listening. Just when it seemed that the situation in Querétaro could grow no worse, the horror deepened, shaking the very foundations of Father Tomás Aguirre's faith and forever altering the fate of San Francisco Xavier. If this story is sending chills down your spine, share it with a friend who loves mysteries. Don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next is far stranger than fiction. As the strange events multiplied, Father Sebastián decided to investigate the history of the confessional itself. Unable to accept the supernatural explanations of his mentor, he sought a rational account that might help. In the dust-filled archives of the sacristy, he uncovered documents dating back to the church's construction. One record described in detail how the main confessional had been carved by 3 Otomi artisans, men who had once been the last spiritual leaders of their people before conversion to Christianity. Curiously, the notes written by the parish priest of that era stated that all 3 artisans had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after finishing their work. Even more disturbing was the mention that the wood used came from a sacred tree, beneath which rituals of time vision were once performed, ceremonies in which participants claimed they could glimpse past and future events while in trance. Sebastián carried these findings to Dr. Montero, hoping for a scientific perspective. The physician, though skeptical of superstitions, offered an alternative explanation. "Confession is a moment of extreme psychological vulnerability," he said, cleaning his surgical instruments with precision. "People reveal their deepest fears, fears they themselves may not consciously know. What your mentor may be experiencing is an extraordinary ability to detect patterns in behavior that suggest probable future actions." "You mean," Sebastián asked, unconvinced, "that Father Tomás might be predicting the future through observation?" "Not exactly," the doctor replied. "Perhaps he unconsciously connects signals the rest of us overlook." And, he added, lowering his voice, "I've noticed he shows signs of extreme exhaustion. Sleep deprivation can cause hallucinations, paranoia, even structured delusions." Meanwhile, Father Tomás's behavior was becoming more erratic. He spent long hours seated in the empty confessional, sometimes in the middle of the night, lit only by the flicker of a single candle. The few brave souls who still confessed to him reported unsettling experiences. He would ask them questions that implied he already knew their sins, even ones they had never voiced. Querétaro itself had taken on a suffocating atmosphere. A relentless drought had turned the fields to dust. The heat trapped within the quarry stone walls made homes unbearable during the day, while the nights seemed darker than ever, the stars glaring down with an almost threatening brilliance. Even Dona Catalina, the old candle seller, whispered of strange things. The altar candles burned down faster than normal, she confided to a customer. And sometimes, when there is no breeze, all the flames lean toward the confessional, as if something inside were pulling them. Children had invented a morbid game, daring each other to sneak into the church at dusk and touch the confessional, swearing they could hear whispers from within when no one was inside. One boy, little Joaquin Vargas, only 8 years old, returned home pale and trembling after such a dare. For 3 days he refused to speak. When his voice finally returned, he said only one sentence. "It told me how I will die when I am old." Word of the disturbances reached the bishop of the diocese, Monsignor Ignacio Valencia. A stout, pragmatic man of 62, he made an unannounced visit to the parish after receiving several troubling letters from parishioners. He found Father Tomás surrounded by open books on biblical prophecy and ancient texts on divination. "Father," the bishop said firmly, "I am concerned about the rumors circulating. They say you have been making unorthodox claims." The old priest raised his head, and the bishop felt a shiver. Tomás's face looked as though it had aged decades in only a few months, his eyes sunken and feverish. "They are not claims, Your Excellency," he said in a hollow voice. "They are facts. The confessional listens, remembers, anticipates." The bishop sighed. "Father Sebastian has shown me your research on the furniture's history. It is nothing more than wood, carved long ago by men who are no longer among us. Any special property you perceive must be weighed against reason and true faith. I have documented every case," Tomás insisted, pointing to his diary. 7 people have died exactly as they described in confession days before. No coincidence can explain such precision. At that, Bishop Valencia made his decision. "You need rest, Father. Sebastian can handle parish duties while you recover. I know a quiet monastery near Puebla where—" "No." Tomás's sudden vehemence startled both men. "I cannot leave. I must understand what is happening. I must stop it." "Stop what exactly?" asked the bishop, his tone soft and paternal, like one calming a frightened child. "The deaths, the tragedies. If I can comprehend how it works, perhaps I can alter the course that seems inevitable." The bishop departed, deeply worried. He instructed Sebastian to keep close watch over his mentor and to send him daily reports. But he stopped short of ordering Tomás's removal, fearing that direct confrontation might only worsen his fragile state. That very night, a storm broke over Querétaro, the first in months of drought. Lightning slashed across the sky, casting ghostly shadows through the church windows. Defying the downpour, Father Tomás ran from his room to the sanctuary, convinced he had to protect the confessional. He entered, soaked and panting, as thunder shook the very foundations of the building. In the flickering light, the confessional seemed to change shape with each flash, its carvings shifting into contorted faces of pain and ecstasy. Driven by equal parts fear and determination, Tomás knelt before it, not as a priest, but as a penitent. "Forgive me, for I have sinned," he whispered. What happened next, only he would know, for he was utterly alone in the church. But the next morning, when Sebastian entered for the first Mass, he found his mentor sitting rigidly in the front pew, staring at the confessional with an expression of pure horror. "I heard it," Tomás murmured, his eyes fixed on the dark wood. "I heard my own voice, confessing a sin I have not yet committed." "What sin?" asked Sebastian, his blood running cold. Tomás's eyes filled with tears. "To abandon my vocation, to break my vows, to flee." I confessed that I would take the confessional, carry it away to destroy it, and then vanish without a trace. That day, Father Tomás Aguirre celebrated Mass with a serenity he had not shown in months. His sermon, drawn from the Book of Job, spoke of the acceptance of suffering and the unfathomable designs of God. Parishioners exchanged surprised glances, whispering that their priest seemed to have regained his old self. But beneath that calm exterior, Tomás had already made a decision that would alter the course of events forever. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the quarry stone walls in shades of orange, Father Sebastián searched for his mentor. He checked the sacristy, the study, and the rectory, but found nothing. Finally, he stepped into the church. The temple was cloaked in a strange half-light. The main altar candles burned, but their glow barely pierced the encroaching shadows. A heavy silence reigned, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood. "Father Tomás," Sebastián called, his voice echoing in the empty nave. No reply. As he walked down the central aisle, he noticed something strange. The confessional was covered with a great black cloth, the kind used to veil crucifixes during Holy Week. He had never seen it shrouded like this outside of the liturgical season. Approaching, he caught a peculiar smell. Reaching out, he found the cloth damp to the touch. Pulling it back, he recoiled in horror. The inside of the confessional was smeared with a dark substance that, in the flickering candlelight, looked like dried blood. The carvings seemed twisted, their faces frozen in genuine agony beneath the crimson layer. Worse still, etched deep into the wood with what seemed to be the point of a knife, were Latin phrases and strange symbols that Sebastián did not recognize. Some cuts were so deep they had pierced through the outer panels into the very structure of the confessional. On the floor lay Father Tomás's diary, its pages stained with the same dark mixture. Sebastián picked it up with trembling hands. The last entry was written in a frenzied scrawl, utterly unlike his mentor's usual neat hand. "I can no longer tell if it is the confessional that speaks through people or people who speak through the confessional. Last night I confessed to myself, and my own voice answered from the other side, telling me what I must do. I must take it away, far from here, where it can cause no more harm. I must destroy it, even if it means my own destruction. And then I must disappear. The seals I have placed should contain it until I can move it at dawn." The final lines dissolved into illegible scratches that trailed off the page. Heart pounding, Sebastián covered the confessional once more and hurried from the church with the diary in hand. In the plaza, he ran into Dona Catalina, packing away her unsold candles. "Have you seen Father Tomás today?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The old woman gave him a sharp look. "I saw him hours ago. He left the church in haste, carrying a large bundle wrapped in dark cloth. He seemed determined. He did not even greet me, as he always does." "Do you know where he was going?" "Toward the old road, the one leading to the abandoned hacienda. A strange place to go so late, don't you think, Father?" She squinted at him. "Is everything all right?" Sebastián forced a smile. "Of course. Perhaps he went to deliver supplies to the peasants out that way." But in his gut, he knew otherwise. He rushed to the parish stable, saddled a horse, and set off along the old road. Night had fallen, and the route was shrouded in darkness. The ruins of the hacienda loomed like broken teeth against the cloudy sky. As he drew nearer, Sebastián smelled smoke. An orange glow flickered within the central courtyard. He dismounted and crept forward. What he saw froze him in place. A great bonfire roared in the middle of the courtyard. Kneeling before it was Father Tomás, arms outstretched, casting pieces of the confessional one by one into the flames. The carved wood twisted as it burned, as if resisting destruction. "Father Tomás!" Sebastián cried. The old priest spun around, startled. In the firelight, his hollow face looked like a reanimated corpse, eyes reflecting the flames like molten pits. "You should not have come, Sebastián," he rasped. "This is my destiny. I heard it from my own mouth. Father Tomás, stop this madness. Sebastian pleaded, his voice breaking above the roar of the flames. You're destroying sacred furniture of the church. Tomás let out a hollow laugh that sounded more like a cough. Sacred? This was never sacred, Sebastian. It was a prison. A prison built of wood that was already cursed before the first nail touched it. Sebastian froze. A prison? For what? For something older than the faith we preach. Something the Otomi priests bound inside the heart of that tree, before it was felled, before it was carved into that confessional. His words spilled out in feverish bursts. They called it a guardian spirit of time. But it was no guardian. It was a parasite. It feeds on what is yet to come. It consumes futures the way fire consumes wood. The young priest shook his head in disbelief. That's impossible. They're only legends. Tomás seized him by the shoulders with a surprising strength. His eyes burned with desperation. Have I not shown you enough? Did you not see Antonio? Don Emilio? All those deaths foretold? It doesn't predict, Sebastian. It makes them happen. Every confession is a sacrifice. Every word spoken in that box becomes a thread the parasite seizes and weaves into reality. It chooses its victims, and it uses us to complete its work. The fire crackled as another panel of dark wood twisted and split in the flames, sending sparks into the night. Sebastian, trembling, tried to steady his voice. Then why destroy it now? Why not sooner? Tomás looked skyward, his face a mask of torment. Because last night, it was my own voice I heard. I confessed my future sins. I saw myself abandoning my vows, fleeing, carrying the confessional into exile. And then, I saw my end. Alone, forgotten, my soul devoured by what I tried to contain. I will not allow it. Better to end it here, in fire, than let it feed again. For a moment, only the storm and the fire spoke. The wind howled through the broken arches of the hacienda, and the flames cast monstrous shadows that danced like demons on the walls. Then Sebastian noticed something. The fire wasn't destroying the wood. It was resisting. The panels of the confessional writhed and twisted, not like timber cracking, but like living flesh in agony. The carved faces in the wood contorted, their mouths open in silent screams. And through the roar of the flames, Sebastian swore he heard whispers, countless voices murmuring fragments of confessions, overlapping in a maddening chorus. Tomás fell to his knees. Do you hear it, Sebastian? Do you hear them? All the voices it has devoured over centuries. They will never stop unless this ends tonight. Just then, lightning tore across the sky, and the bonfire blazed with unnatural intensity. For an instant, the entire courtyard was bathed in blinding white light. When Sebastian's vision cleared, Father Tomás was gone. Only the flames remained, and within them, the outline of the confessional, still whole, still intact, untouched by destruction. Sebastian staggered backward, horrified. He searched the courtyard, calling out desperately, Father Tomás, Father, but there was no answer. Only the crackling of the fire and the whispers, now louder, clearer, as if hundreds of unseen mouths were pressing against the air around him. With a cry of terror, he mounted his horse and fled into the night, never once daring to look back. The next morning, peasants who passed near the hacienda found the courtyard cold and empty. There was no trace of a fire, no ash, no charred wood. Only a great circle scorched into the earth, blacker than coal, as though lightning itself had struck the ground. And in the center of that circle, perfectly intact, stood the confessional. But Father Tomás Aguirre was never seen again. After Father Tomás's disappearance, San Francisco Xavier Parish entered one of the darkest chapters in its history. For weeks, rumors spread through Querétaro like wildfire. Some claimed the old priest had gone mad and fled into the mountains. Others whispered that the devil himself had come for him. But the confessional, the object at the center of all suspicions, was inexplicably found the very next morning back inside the church, in its usual place, as though it had never left. Bishop Valencia ordered it sealed immediately. For months, it remained draped in black cloth, forbidden to be used. Eventually, the bishop summoned a group of carpenters with instructions to dismantle it and burn the wood in secret. But when they entered the temple, they discovered that all their tools had rusted overnight. Saw blades snapped at the first attempt. Nails bent as if striking stone. Frightened, the men refused to continue. So the bishop decided on a different solution. The confessional was to be walled up beneath the main altar, hidden from sight, accompanied by the strictest ecclesiastical prohibition. The faithful were told nothing. Only the clergy knew that the object lay entombed beneath their feet. Decades passed. Generations came and went. The story of Father Tomás became little more than a hushed legend, a cautionary tale whispered among priests during long nights of study. But the silence was broken almost a century later. On June 4, 1917, an earthquake struck Querétaro. Measuring 6.7 on the Richter scale, it toppled roofs, cracked streets, and shook the very foundations of San Francisco Xavier. The tremor split open the sealed crypt beneath the altar. Dust filled the nave as stones crashed to the ground. When the debris cleared, workers assigned to the repairs found it. The confessional, intact, its wood gleaming as though untouched by time. Curiosity overcame caution. 5 of the workers dared to enter and examine it. Within 23 days, all 5 were dead. One fell from scaffolding without explanation. Another drowned in a shallow canal he had crossed safely 1,000 times. A third was crushed by a carriage horse gone mad. The last 2 were found lifeless in their beds, their faces frozen in expressions of unspeakable terror. Terrified, the surviving masons refused to work further until the object was removed. The bishop of the time, fearful of scandal and unrest, ordered that the documents detailing Father Tomás's case, as well as the workers' inexplicable deaths, be sealed and sent to the Vatican. The confessional was restored to its place, and the matter declared closed. Today, the confessional remains in San Francisco Xavier, used only rarely and always under supervision. The official church records make no mention of its supposed powers, nor of Father Tomás's disappearance. For the faithful, it is just another piece of old woodwork, a relic of the colonial era. But those who have dared to sit within its dark enclosure, even for a moment, tell another story. They speak of whispers that seem to come from nowhere, of voices that know their most intimate fears, and of fleeting, terrifying visions of their own deaths. And so, almost 200 years later, the mystery endures. What really happened to Father Tomás Aguirre? Was he consumed by his own madness, or by something far older, bound in wood and shadow? And the most unsettling question of all, when the next confession is heard inside that confessional, will it be a whisper of the past, or a seed of the future already waiting to come true?